Good morning,
Hmm?
everyone. My name is DENNATA RIZKY, and we are going to present our presentation about poem analysis. The title of the poem is The Listener. Our member groups are BUNGA ALMIA, DENNATA, and VICKY DEWANGGA. Short biography of the author. Walter John Delamar was born on 25 April 1873. He was born to James Edward Delamar, a principal at the Bank of England, and Lucy Sophia Browning, or James' second wife. Delamar preferred to be known as Jack by his family and friends, as he disliked Walter's name. Delamar suffered from a coronary thrombosis in 1947 and died of another in 1956. He was an English poet, short story writer, and novelist. He is probably best remembered for his poem The Listeners. This is the poem The Listener. "Is there anybody there?" said the traveller, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse, in the silence, champed the grass of the forest ferny floor, and a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveller's head, and he smote upon the door again a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said.
But no one distinguished the traveller. No head from the leaf ring still, leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, where he stood perplexed and still, but only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then, stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood droning the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveller's call.
And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, groping the dark turf, near the starred and leafy sky. For he suddenly smote on the door, even louder, and lifted his head. "Tell them I came, and no one answered. That I kept my word," he said. Never the least stir met the listeners.
Through every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the still house, from the one man left awake. Ay, they heard his foot upon the stirrup, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backward when the plugging of hoofs were gone. The summary of the poem. The Listener. The Listener is a 36-line verse long poem. On the night of the full moon, a traveler came to the house and knocked on the door. He demanded that the door be opened, but no one responded to his calls. So quiet, deadly silence in the house, and a bird flew out of the window above his head. The traveler knocked on the door again, but still no one answered. He just stood there alone with his horse chewing grass. A group heard his call of spirit living in the house. The traveler realized that no one will open the door for him, so he gave up and got on his horse to leave. As he went into the darkness, and the householder heard the sound of hoof on the rock. What is the main subject of the poem? Apart from underscoring the word's innate ignorance, the listener seems to reflect the existential loneliness that results from the mystery. The poetry creates a distinction distinction between its isolated human subject, the nature around the abandoned house, and the spirit that does not answer the traveler's call. Why the author wrote the poem? I think it's because the author wants to tell us that there are still isolation and loneliness in the world. In the poem, there is a house in the middle of the forest, far from the crowd. The listener, whoever they are, cannot interact with the living, human world. To them, the traveler is simply a voice from the world of man, a representative from the other side of mortality. It suggests a world in which people are alone and cannot count on one another, dead or alive, to answer an urgent call. It means isolation and loneliness. What is the setting of the poem? The setting of the listener is a house in the forest at night. Instructions for setting are subtly revealed at the beginning of the poem. When the traveler arrived, he knocked on the moonlit door, which indicated that it was night and that he had arrived at the house. Meanwhile, horses are grazing on the forest fern floor, indicating that the house is in the forest and that the area around it is overgrown. The poem is happening in the past because the traveler used the horse as transportation. In a modern day, you would use a car to go travel. The speaker's tone or attitude. I think the speaker's tone or attitude is mixed between curious, frustrated, and gloomy. It is curious because the travelers want to know if they like to open the door. If so, he curious who it is. In the poem, the traveler frustrated. He is knocking the door 3 times, yet no one is answering or opening the door. He felt frustrated, and he left the house with mounting to his house. It is also gloomy because the poem setting is a house in the middle of a forest or interprets as a loneliness and isolation. The poet message. The names were given to the traveler and the listeners, as well as the title of the poem, foreshadow their roles in the poem. The theme of the poem. The theme of the poem is mystery. The traveler wants to know if there someone would answer her call and open the door. It remains a mystery. Who will be going to open the door for him, and who is it? It indicates that there are certain mysteries beyond the realm of humankind that people cannot access. The poem was concluded without leaving the reader wiser about who the subject is or what she was looking at in an empty house in the middle of the night, nor does it give the reader an idea of who lived or has lived in the house.
What figures of speech are included? There are three figures of speech in the listeners. The first one is metaphor, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken. In the above line, air is being compared to something that could be stirred and shaken. Air can be diffused and blown, but it is not something that can be picked up in order to shake. The second one is simile, the silence circles softly backwards. Then the final figure of speech that we found in this poem is anaphora. Anaphora is a deliberate repetition of the first parts of the sentences in order to achieve an artistic effect. Stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of man, stood threading the faint moonbeams on the dark stair. Is there any symbols in the poem? Yes, there are two symbols in the poem. The first one is the bird. The birds are the symbol of forest peace, and the events in the poem destroy the forest peace. Not only does the traveler appear to disrupt in the rest, sending it flying away, but the speaker appears to disrupt its home and bring the forest and the listeners to the minds of the people left awake. The second one is the horse. The horse is a symbol of life, finding its home in the land of the living. It is the method that the travelers use to arrive and escape from the house, describing the eerie forest multiple times throughout the forest as though it doesn't at all feel the fear that his human master does. Does the poem contain irony? Yes, it does. The poem uses the device that stories use, including dialogue, point of view, and suspense. Interestingly, the poem allows the reader to experience the action from the perspective not only of the traveler, but also of the phantom listeners. The fact that the reader knows what the traveler doesn't create suspense and makes use of dramatic irony. What other sounds device? Delhammer used alliteration and assonance to impact the effect of key moments in the poem. For example, the alliteration of forest vernifleur creates a softness that mimics the texture of the overgrown forest. Likewise, the S and O sound of the last quartet, I, they heard his foot upon the syrup, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence circled softly backward when the plunging hosts were gone. Does the lines in the poem rhyme? If so, what is the rhyme scheme? Yes, they do. A listeners is composed of quartets following an A-B-C-B rhyme scheme. Does the poem have matter? If so, what is it? The poem has no consistent matter. Two certain parts follow particular metrical patterns.
Okay, now is about the allusion. We found some phrases that describe the allusion in this poem. The first phrase is moonlight door. It means lit by the moon. It draws a silence condition in the night. And then the second phrase is ferny floor. It means a pounding in or overgrown with ferns. It shows a place that is grown by the plants. The traveler's horse was eating there. And then the third phrase is no one descended to the traveler. It means to go or pass from a higher to lower place, move or come down. It tells that there is no one who comes and meets the traveler. So the word descended has negative meaning. And then the last phrase is smooth on the door. It means to hit hard. It shows that the traveler knocked the door hardly because he is not patient anymore. And then next, it is about the allegory. Is the poem an allegory? Yes, it is. Allegory in this poem is a picture of democratic government that is wrong. The president, who is pictured as the traveler, asks for the aspiration of his society, which are pictured by people in the house but don't want to answer the traveler. They dissolve in silence. The president is acting violently, which is pictured by the word smooth on the door. This treatment causes some reactions. The first reaction is that some are not strong and run away. This is depicted with birds flying out of the house. And some are surviving without strength, which is described by the silence of the people in the house. And then the next is about the mood in this poem. The mood of this poem is mixed between scary, mysterious, and loneliness. The mood of this poem is scary because it is in the middle of the night. The house in in the middle of the forest, which is only illuminated by the moonlight, adds to the impression of this poem, especially since the atmosphere is quiet. And then why it is mysterious? Because in the poem, the traveler wants to know if they like to open the door. If so, he curious who it is. And then why it is lonely? Because the poem setting is a house in the middle of a forest, or interpret it as loneliness. And then the next is about the cultural references. There are two sentences that we found which is describe the cultural reference of this poem. The first sentence is no one descended to the traveler. This illustrates a human culture where they are led by a cruel leader. They will not want to give their aspiration and implement their democracy. The second sentence is a bird flew up out of turret. The, this illustrates a human culture when he feels oppressed and unable to hold back. They inevitably run away. And then the next is about how do we relate the poem with our experience as human beings. The poem is closely related to real human life, where if we interpret the listener as a ghost, the man is the traveler. Humans may unconsciously beware the ghosts, and without knowing it, the ghost is watching him. The presence of human might make a ghost disturb so that when we are in the ghost territory, we are made uncomfortable and eventually leave the place, as the poem says. And then the next is about our comments in the poem. Poetry is extraordinary and can make the reader feel the author's atmosphere. Starting from the feeling lonely to isolated, this poem also leaves some questions about the ending, such as were there really any people in the house? Was there really a host of phantom inside the house? Moreover, why the traveler reached the house at night? Okay, and then the next is our resources. You can see it by yourself. And then I think that's all the presentation from our group. Thank you for your attention and we are waiting for your responses. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.